right, here we go. Hello and welcome to Heard, where we are celebrating the voices of people, of all people, and providing a space for their stories to be heard. I'm your host, Kevin, and we're live right now on, we're supposed to be live at facebook.com/heardonfb. And you'll also find us live on YouTube most days. We're having some technical issues right now. We are on Instagram at heard.now. And I hope whoever you are, wherever you find yourself on the journey of faith, no faith, or somewhere in between, you'll find something here that speaks to you. And I ripped that directly from Ed Bacon from Pasadena.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
I used to love his intro.
Yeah, he's great. He's so good.
And so I'm here today with Ryan Bell from Pasadena. Ryan is an author, speaker, podcaster at lifeaftergod.org, and national organizing manager for the secular student organization, a nonprofit national organization dedicated to atheist, humanist, and other non-theist students. Ryan also serves as the humanist chaplain at the University of Southern California, on the other side of the world from me.
Totally on the other side of the country. Yep.
How's is this the earliest you've been up since being a pastor on a Sunday?
Well, it's funny. I was Seventh-day Adventist, so church was on Saturday for me. But
right.
Yeah, no, I'm still a pretty, maybe not on the weekends, but yeah. One of the advantages of not going to church is definitely being able to sleep in.
Amen, brother. Bedside Baptist.
Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, I never really knew anybody in Seventh-day Adventist or Adventism, however you say it.
Mm-hmm.
And but was that their main thing? They just do church on Saturdays? Like every church kind of has its thing. Is that their thing?
Yeah, I mean that's one thing. I mean the other big piece of it is the belief in the soon coming of Jesus. So it was from my childhood up, it was this big emphasis on Jesus coming back anytime soon, like just right any day now kind of.
So in that case, they're kind of like the evangelicals.
Yeah, there's definitely an evangelical thread to it. There's a lot of different, components, but yeah, definitely an evangelical thread to it.
There's not any like strange rituals or anything besides having to go to church on Sunday.
No, it's not really. I mean, I guess the one ritual that people sometimes think of is every time we would celebrate communion quarterly instead of weekly, like Catholics or Episcopalians. Mm-hmm. And whenever we would celebrate communion, we would do the foot washing, which most congregations don't do. So, but it's definitely a biblical thing. It's not something weird like made up thing. I mean, the Bible's, yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean by made up. Yeah, it's a spectrum there. I mean, it's not like polygamy or anything like that. It's not like, yeah, I hear you on that. So, so it was 6 years ago that you decided to pull out of full-time ministry. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit of your life up to that point and then that whole transition.
Yeah, it's actually been 7 years. My last sermon as a pastor was in 2013, the last Saturday of March. So like literally just a few weeks ago, 7 years ago. And, I raised in a fundamentalist denomination. I mean, you don't need to know a lot about Seventh-day Adventism to understand that it's basically a fundamentalist evangelicalism, very much, if you think of conservative Baptists, like taboos around going to the movies, playing cards, you know, who you can date, what in our case, what you can eat, and a lot of personal morality type of emphasis. That was kind of my growing up experience, and the churches were very moralistic, a lot of ways to get yourself sideways with the congregation, whether it was like smoking or drinking or not keeping the Sabbath properly or getting divorced, or there's just a lot of ways that you could screw up your relationship with the congregation or with the church. So I just from the very beginning started without even really knowing I was doing it, I would say, this is like in the middle of the 90s, like just being more inclusive. So it sort of started with sort of looking the other way with some congregants that smoked, and not making a big deal about it. And then finding that some people were not exactly keeping the Sabbath the way that we're supposed to, and sort of being like, well, that's their choice. And so I think there was just a lot of just being permissive, I guess, with people's personal choices around their faith and their spiritual practice. And so, one thing led to another. And of course, the Adventist Church still has a struggle with allowing women to be ordained ministers. So there's, this kind of deep sexism ingrained into everything. Which is weird because one of the founders and the alleged prophet of the church was a woman. So, there's some contradictions there for sure. And then the other big issue was, when I started to really meet either members of my church or family members of members who were gay or lesbian. And that was kind of one of the probably the biggest hurdle that I faced, which was my inclination to say, well, I don't know, like even in the early days, like when I thought, okay, maybe it's a sin, but Jesus welcomed sinners, so even from that basic understanding that, God doesn't honor, same-sex relationships, even so, like, even if that were true, why would we chase them away? You know what I mean? I guess it was like deliberately living in sin. So if you're deliberately living in sin, then maybe that's a reason. So anyway, I just started accepting, LGBT members to my church, and not really making a big deal about their personal sexuality, but also not really telling anybody that I was doing that. It was sort of a kind of a quiet thing because I didn't want to out anyone. And we weren't like, like you referenced Ed Bacon a minute ago, like we weren't like openly accepting, welcoming congregation. So I wanted us to get to that point, but we weren't there yet. And so I just wanted to give people a space to be with us without like outing them or without creating a big crisis in the church, which I knew that it would. We were almost there. Anyway, long story short, a trans woman joined our church at my invitation, who had been Adventist all her life and had been estranged from the church ever since she, I guess understood that she was trans and started to transition in her own way, and I don't know all the details of that, but was definitely pushed out of the church. And so, we were like, well, come to our church, like we're a bunch of outcasts and misfits. And anyway, so she came, and then one thing led to another. There were a variety of issues, but in April or end of March 2013, I, depending on who you asked, I either resigned or I was asked to leave.
It's politics, right?
So, and so I came to the realization that I certainly wasn't a Seventh-day Adventist anymore. That was the first thing that became clear to me. And then it took me a while to figure out if I was still a Christian or not.
Is the Seventh-day Church well organized? It sounds like it is. I mean, I know there's one locally, but are they organized like Jehovah's Witness or the Mormon Church?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's definitely a global denomination. The world headquarters is in Silver Spring, Maryland. It's the fastest growing parts of the church are in the 2/3 world and the global South. And so it's, and yet there's still some growth. I mean, a big emphasis on evangelism and growing the church and making sure people are converted, and kind of a weird emphasis on remnant, like a lot of churches have. Where they're the ones, the real special ones that God is going to use to bring about, even if God will save everyone in the end or save lots of people in the end, it's via this special group that's going to happen.
Even talking about it is so exhausting. It's just so funny that it's funny you bring that up.
because for me with the LGBT thing, for me it was like I had read a bunch of books about how, you know, the Bible really wasn't against gay and lesbian people, that it just doesn't really address it the way we know it today. It's sort of the way that we have same-sex loving relationships in the modern world just didn't exist in the ancient world. And so the two really, it's sort of like asking, like, does the Bible permit television watching? And then you're like, well, the Bible didn't know anything about television.
Yeah.
So it was sort of like one of those things. And I was talking to some friends, we were trying to figure out, like, how do we like move this kind of idea forward? And it just finally like hit me with such force one day that you know, if it takes like a book of, I don't know, 400 pages to explain how the Bible isn't against, it's like, can't we just accept people? Like, I just, you know, and so from there things start to fall apart. Like, I mean, I think the real crisis moment was, you know, realizing that I thought Paul was just wrong about this, you know, and as an evangelical, you don't get to decide that Paul was wrong. Like,
Oh, no.
Paul was right.
Yeah. And that's what I think. I think it's really interesting that the pivotal gosh, part, I need more coffee. The pivotal part of your conversion or deconstruction, whatever you want to call it, is the LGBT issue, because the church put so much shame, and we've talked about this in the last month since doing these. The church put so much shame on sexuality, and which is your body, and when they do that, whether it's you know, like LGBT issues or women and their sexuality and the ability to be free and all these things, it's like finally that's what it takes for some people to realize, listen, I cannot smoke, I cannot go to the movies, but I can't change who I am. And I think it's almost like that's what it takes. It starts to affect them personally in a way that they can no longer fight it or get away from it.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's like it becomes not something you choose to do, but something that's, you know, intimately a part of your identity, and that's a whole different ball of wax.
Do you man, yeah, it is funny how it's like, even as you're talking about it, it's like I always feel like that meme of that lady that's analyzing, and it's like, oh yeah, this rule, that rule, this rule, that rule. And I've seen so many great humanist sayings that, like, why do we need a 2,000-year-old book to tell us to love one another? Why can't we just say love one another? You know, right. like why are we making this so complicated? And and I think from what I've seen from you, oh, I'm sorry. Would you tell our viewers about your first Life After God experiment, or did you already say that?
No. Yeah, I mean, I can just very quickly mention that. So after I left the church, or the church left me, or mutually, you know, we had a conscious uncoupling, or whatever you want to call it. You know, that was springtime, like around now. So for the rest of that calendar year, so 8-9 months, I was really, first of all, unemployed, you know, for the first time. I had some severance, so I had a little bit of time. Excuse me. And I just really didn't know what I was going to do professionally, but also like spiritually. So I had been going to church every week professionally, like I was a professional churchgoer. And so it was very unsettling to not have that, and also a relief to not have that, to be honest. And so I basically just took some time. You know, I went to Nicaragua for about 6 weeks, studied Spanish, and just tried to get away. I thought I would do some writing, but it was just too hard to do. It was too painful. So I just, when I came back from Nicaragua, I started going to some churches that I thought might suit me, or I was just sort of like church shopping for the first time in my life. You know, as someone who was like just over 40, I was like church shopping and trying to figure out what I was going to do, and nothing, you know, to cut a long story short, none of it fit, none of it felt right. And so I thought, you know, I'm trying too hard. Like I'm putting too much pressure on myself to figure this out. So I'm just going to not do this and do something else. And at the time I was very involved in some issues of the US-Mexico border, and I thought maybe I would become a journalist. And so I was doing some writing and some reporting from the border. And I thought maybe I would be sort of, you know, back and forth between El Paso and LA, and try to do some writing, and around the same time I had this idea to do, to sort of take a year and write about atheism as an experiment. So it's just, that's what I ended up doing. And I got a website, Year Without God. And I started writing a blog called Year Without God. And from the first day, it just blew up. Like it was, covered on CNN and NPR and, this morning news show in Australia and the BBC. And like I was on probably 36 podcasts within 2 weeks. It was just exhausting. And like my social media went crazy and it became a thing, it became, Hemant Mehta covered it on day one and then it just went from there. So then I knew like, okay, I'm into this. Like I have to keep doing this. And I wanted to, but I also had like a public now that was sort of following along. So I wrote about my experience. I went to some events, some conventions and some gatherings of atheists and tried to figure out what they believed and what they were about. And, found out that it was pretty diverse. And at the end of that year, which was the end of 2014, I had basically decided that I didn't believe in God anymore, that I didn't really believe in anything supernatural. I just thought the best way to live my life, the best way to sort of make sense of the world and my place in it was to focus on the things that I knew with some certainty. And what I know with some certainty is that I'm here, the people in my life that I see every day, my family, my friends, they're here. My community is here, and all the institutions and the systems that keep us together are here. And that's what, I can work on and feel, confident about, that I'm making a difference in the world right here, right now.
Yeah. I think there's this idea of being present and not so future focused when, in the life of an atheist. The idea of heaven is now, or that there's not. I saw Sam Harris. I've seen 2 Sam Harris quotes this week I really loved, and one was, "Is this life not enough?" Like why are we longing for this everlasting life? Like right now, what can you do, and what change can you make in the life that you have? And so, I'm sure in your seventh day days you were living in the present, but I guess I would assume whenever you got to a place of unknowing, that's when you would just begin to rely on this supernatural situation.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I feel like as my sort of doctrinal faith started to fade, I started to put more emphasis on like a political theology that was about the here and now in much the same way as I have already. But there were certain questions that I just left alone because I knew that it wasn't going to get me anywhere in the congregational context that I was in. It wasn't going to be useful to open certain cans of worms. So like, for instance, a 6-day literal creation versus like some kind of evolution. Like I knew that the church was very strong on creationism, and that, biology professors and geology professors and so forth were fired from, academic institutions for even hinting that they might have some leanings towards evolution. So I'm like, and whether or not evolution is true or creation is true didn't really have anything to do with how I was, trying to end homelessness in Hollywood. Like it just, because my congregation was in Hollywood. And so I was like, well, that's not really relevant right now to me. Like, I'm sure that's an interesting debate to have. I would watch, like, I don't know, The Daily Show or, with Jon Stewart, and he would make fun of creationists and I would laugh along because I was like, this is ridiculous. And then realized like I'm a part of one of those groups actually. But it wasn't relevant to my daily ministry. It wasn't really, part of what made my congregation tick. So I just ignored it.
See, this is the thing this is where I get confused. I see some common elements here with the present. I see a lot of, I see some churches moving towards social justice, racial reconciliation. They hold on to, of course, a huge amount of supernatural beliefs, but then they also have a part of them that is trying to be relevant and trying to be involved in the community. Yet, and so I see that that there are some common elements where they could relate to free thought or atheist folks.
Sure. Yeah.
And atheists, just simply put, is we all believe, you know, I'm sorry, we all do not believe in a certain number of gods. Atheists just go one God further, you know. So it's in that mind, we have so much in common. And I guess I don't understand, like in your case, you were fired from 2 universities, right? And I don't understand why you would get rid of someone that has so much to contribute and so many opportunities to see eye to eye with them, when you live 90% of your day in the here and now, in what you can see, touch, and feel, and yet you disregard them because they don't hold on to your supernatural beliefs.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I started to call functional atheism, and I sort of maintain that like maybe 99% of people are functional atheists. Like they live their life based on, you know, the here and now, as you say, and you know, if they get sick, they go to the doctor.
Yes.
You know, in fact, I just finished a sort of a reading group webinar seminar on Albert Camus' The Plague.
I love him.
There's a clergyman in the story named Panelu, and he's sort of having a crisis of his faith, you know, during this plague, and he comes to the conclusion that it would be hypocritical for him to go to the doctor if he were to come down with the plague. And sure enough, he comes down with the plague, and you can imagine what happens. So, yeah. You know, so I think a lot of us, you know, no matter what our faith is, we might pray also, but we don't just pray. Like, we also take action to solve the problem. So if we're unemployed, we don't just pray for God to bring us another job. We believe that, you know, Christians believe that maybe God also wants you to go look for a job. Right? Or, you know, we don't just pray to get over coronavirus. We actually think, well, God would want me to go and use the best resources available to me. So, you know, so people rationalize that, and they say, yeah, I'm praying, but one of the ways that God answers my prayer is through doctors and nurses, you know, and so.
But until you take it a step further where you've taken it and just said, I'm done, do you think that there's always going to be the opportunity to misinterpret or to confuse or to manipulate? I mean, because for a lot of people would agree with you, like, I go to the doctor, I do this, I do that, but in their day-to-day life, they say, well, but I'm not going to support this politician because they support, you know, abortion or gay marriage or things like that. And it starts to contradict. And at that point, that's when religion can really become toxic, I think, is that it begins to change people's behavior in a way that's not helpful to others.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the thing about monotheistic religion is that it's absolute, right? So, like, what's true for me is true for everyone. Like, it's not just kind of this postmodern idea that this is my truth and you have your truth. This, you know, monotheism, especially Christianity, is very absolute.
Yeah.
There's, you know, no one comes to the Father but by me, said Jesus, you know. So even people who might find their way to God and not know that they found their way to God through Jesus, they did anyway. Like, they did, whether they realize it or not. So I think it's hard for Christians to say, well, you know, you don't have to have my exact faith or whatever. In fact, that, you know, that's legalism, like, that you can be saved by your good works, you know. So it's actually the opposite of being a good person is the thing that matters. No, in Christianity, that's legalism. Like, being a good person doesn't matter anything. You know, it's only your relationship with Jesus that matters. And so, you know, according to mainstream Christianity, you know, the worst person in the world could have a deathbed conversion, and sort of a lifelong saint could have some doubts at their last breath, and they could end up in the wrong place, you know. So
it gets a little silly.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there are a lot of Christians, though, that are trying to square the circle. You know, they're trying to say, I have this faith, I want to believe, or I do believe that there's this higher power or this God person figure that is kind of holding it all together, that gives my life meaning. But I also recognize that I have agency, and I don't want to disempower people. So I'm going to try to have a foot in both worlds. And I did that for years, you know, I did that for a lot of years. And I think it definitely produces some cognitive dissonance that becomes wearing and tiring after a while. And I think for me, it wasn't just me. I was doing that work on behalf of an entire congregation. So I wasn't just trying to maintain my belief. I was trying to believe on behalf of all of these other people, because they looked to me like they had their doubts. And so if I expressed my doubts, they'd be like, oh man, we're all screwed. Like if pastor doesn't, believe, then what the hell am I supposed to do?
It's exhausting, even hearing you talk about it, because I can imagine being in that situation. And you said a while ago, you said, and we were so close, we were almost there. And can you speak to that? Because I think there's a lot of people that say we're so close, we're almost there, and you do see changes, but I feel like it's never going to be enough, because they're always going to come back to some way to justify it. I don't know. It's so frustrating.
Well, yeah. When I say we were almost there, what I meant was, I had said to our LGBT members, you're welcome here. Mm-hmm. And not just welcome, but the full life of the congregation. Like, you can be leaders. I expect our straight members to learn from you as much as you learn from them. This is not we're going to condescend and deign to have you be among us or something. It's, but it's still a don't ask, don't tell environment. And so I wanted the LGBT members of the church to be the ones to say, okay, we're ready to have this conversation, because I knew that they were going to be the ones to bear the brunt of that conversation. So it wasn't my place to say, okay, guys, we're going to have this big conversation and blow this whole thing up. And we were just about to the place where I think some of the members were saying, okay, it's worth it. If it blows up, we'll leave. That's fine. If it doesn't blow up, great. We've done this really difficult thing and been faithful to it. And we had a whole sort of ethical process that we were going to go through to be inclusive of every voice. And it just didn't get there. But I think, to your point, it would have always been an uphill battle, because we would have been the outlier in an institution that says, this is not acceptable.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. I mean, well, I know locally, and it's probably different here in the Bible Belt, but it's like you have a lot of churches that come across as culturally relevant, and they might have, bands and wear shorts and things, but they won't let a woman speak on a Sunday or preach or whatever, or they won't let, they're not affirming or, of LGBT, and so it's like, let's say they go ahead and do those things. Well, are they going to talk about economic injustice, or is that going to take another 20 years? Are they going to talk about and so it's like, I think, so that's really where I get frustrated. And it sounds like from me, whenever I watch you, you see a lot of people that leave the church, especially when you've grown up, and especially when you're in your early 40s, which I think is just incredible. That whenever they leave it, they still have all these relationships and this stuff they're working through. And maybe that's what life after God is for you. But to me, it seems like you've just been like, all right, I'm done. I'm moving forward. It seems like a much more clear-cut process with you.
Yeah. And I think, it's always so hard to reflect on your own experience and know exactly what happened. It's, I'm in the middle of watching season 3 of Westworld. Yeah. So I'm deep inside that kind of mentality. And I'm thinking to myself, have I ever questioned the nature of my reality? Yes, absolutely I have. And so I think for me, I was deconstructing behind a pretty solid veneer for most people. I was also writing a lot, so I was writing on a few blogs. I had a Huffington Post blog, and I wrote for this liberal Adventist website called Spectrum. And, I would get into a lot of trouble for the things I was writing there, but not everyone knew about that. Not everybody understood what I was doing there. And so I was done before I was done, in a way, you know what I mean? So by the time I left, I was like, and it really cascaded for me. I was done with Adventism immediately. I was like, that's it. Like, I can't imagine trying to find my way in this denomination. And then Christianity took a little longer for me, but I was done with Christianity pretty quickly, but that was harder. And then I think in terms of really leaving God behind, that was fairly easy. Jesus was harder for me. And I still have some sympathies for the Jesus character of history, like um, the persona of Jesus, especially from
Mm-hmm.
liberation theology, and so I had my theology, but once I left it, I was like, okay, the question is what's next. Like the question is, how do I move forward, um, and create a worldview for myself? Not create a worldview, but like find a way of expressing my worldview, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
in non-theistic terms. That and so for me, it was that was the motivation, and also for other people, because I think what happens is people leave and they are a little bit unmoored, like
Mm-hmm.
they're tossed around, I was, and you feel like ungrounded. um, if anything, like the world is chaotic, especially we can relate to that right now. Like the
Yeah.
world is unpredictable. Like wherever you live in the United States, your governor might come on the TV this afternoon and tell you something completely different than he told you yesterday, or she told
Yeah.
you yesterday. So we're definitely living in a world right now that's highlights the chaotic nature of human experience. And as a Christian, there was always God. Like God was the anchor.
Yeah.
And that was like, no matter what happened, you could refer to that and say, like, even though you couldn't really explain what God is or was, or like, it was like, it was like the ground,
Yeah.
right? The ground that didn't move. And when that's gone, you realize like, okay, this really is unpredictable, right?
Sure.
Like anything could happen. I could die tomorrow. As I like to say now, there are no promises. And Christianity is all about promises.
Yeah.
And learning to live without promises is kind of the way I describe my journey into humanism. And that is sort of, where you find yourself. And it might seem a little pessimistic, but it can be very beautiful as well, because you realize that, like you said, this life is the only life you have, and the only way to really value it is to embrace it as a temporary, temporal thing.
Well, I mean, yeah, I love the quote, hope is not a plan. Like,
Hmm.
like I want to have hope. I love hope. I mean, I strive for hope, but that's not my plan. So do you have, can you relate to your Christian friends on the person of Jesus without the supernatural?
Yeah, sure. And I think the people that I'm still friends with the most, in terms of Christian folks, are very progressive, very, maybe even agnostic when it
Hmm.
comes to their faith. Um, but if they have a sort of like a liberation theology view of Jesus, I can relate to that very much so. Yeah.
Um, have your relationships suffered? Like, do you still talk to the people from your past?
Some, and it's really a kind of a B kind of thing. Like there are people that I'm still close with, and we talk, and our differences in worldview and philosophy don't really affect our friendship or our relationship. And then there's people that I just don't talk to anymore. That I don't think they hate me, and I don't hate them, but it wasn't one of those things where like, I'll never speak to you again.
Yeah.
It was more just like our worlds didn't intersect anymore. And that was, they almost couldn't relate to me suddenly. Like I was this
Yeah.
person who was like, who is that guy even?
It's weird how you can grow up with people, and as soon as you leave that one circle, it's like you never existed.
Yeah. And I to be fair, I do that too, like
Sure.
I think I've been close to some people, and then when I moved away, I just haven't been as in touch with them,
Hmm.
um, and I think it's a little difficult to intentionally maintain relationships as you get older in life. I think when we're younger, we need a lot of friendships. We need a lot of
Hmm.
people around us. As I've gotten older, I've been much more content to have a handful of people that are
Sure.
close to me. And I don't feel the need to be as social as I once
Sure.
was.
So do you still have a need for community, or do you find that community at with your job, or?
I think we all have a need for community at some level. I have a great relationship with my partner. I
Mhm.
have 2 kids, and I'm very involved in my community. And so I have a lot of thoughts about this, and I haven't organized them entirely, but so my community, I think I get my sense of community from my political engagement.
Mhm.
Probably the people I'm in closest community with are the members of the tenants union in my town, and the people that are a part of, the coalition to increase police oversight, like civilian oversight of the police department. I ran for city council here. Yeah, so I'm very, involved in my community. So I haven't felt the need to create like I don't want this to sound harsh, but like an artificial community alongside of it. It's almost like to create these communities sometimes feels like we're gonna, like, we all have our communities, right? We all have our families, we have our neighbors. We have the coffee shop we go to, we have the gym that we work out in maybe, or something like that. And then we create this alternative community over here that's sort of separate, that requires extra time and extra investment. And I've got to somehow now figure out how to integrate my political community into this community and make it fit. And it's like, at some point I'm like, it hit me after I left the church. We have community. It's called, again, this word doesn't appeal to people, but it's politics. Like we have, politics is how we decide to live together as neighbors in our neighborhoods. And like, I want more people to get involved in that, And I think sometimes to create a Sunday morning community, as valuable as that can be, as long as that doesn't take away from you being engaged in the world, which is, I think, the biggest problem with Christianity in the first place, is that it disengages people from the struggle here and now.
So in a way, I don't want to put this on you, so tell me if you disagree, but in a way, did you almost have to lose Jesus to find Jesus? I mean, everything you're talking about, standing up for tenants' rights and the service industry, I love following you and everything you have to say about all that. That sounds much more like the Jesus of Scripture than it does maybe the Jesus that you were worshiping for so long.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I mean, I think the Bible, according to the Bible account, Jesus was found in the synagogue,
Yeah.
But Jesus' life, according to the Bible story, didn't revolve around synagogue life, although Jewish life did revolve around the synagogue, but it's a very different context. That was their church and their Rotary Club and their, you know what I mean? It was all kind of like, everything was there together, and politics was all a big part of that as well. And there wasn't this neat separation of like politics and religion the way we have today. But Jesus wasn't concerned with growing a church or something like that. He was just in the world with people doing things that mattered. And he was building his movement, which was largely political, like a political movement. It was a social political movement that was designed to liberate people from oppression. And I think that was his self-understanding of his calling. And people were drawn to that. Again, I'm saying all of this, like, not necessarily historically true, but narratively, according to the story. And I think it was very like charismatic leader focused, it's very Jesus focused. And I think I would envision something much more egalitarian, much less focused on a Messiah than what we have in Jesus.
I love Dwight from The Office, Rainn Wilson. He posted this week. He said, "The metamorphosis of Jesus Christ from a humble servant to the abject poor to a symbol that stands for gun rights, prosperity theology, anti-science, limited government that neglects the destitute, and fierce nationalism is truly the strangest transformation in human history." and so that, for me, I'm not really like doing this to try to like save Christianity or save the name of Christianity, but if there is one thing that I think a conversation that could be had is about that metamorphosis of Jesus, and how, Richard Rohr, a Catholic priest I like to follow, a pretty progressive guy, says that Jesus never tells us to worship him. He says to follow me. And so I do see some overlap where the atheist and free thought community says, okay, I'll take the Jesus that is the humble servant, stands for the poor, the tenants' rights. Is there any overlap in your world where you a bridge where you can see where people of faith can kind of, join forces with the free thought community?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you have to just bravely say that you're not sort of what you're interested in and what you're not interested in as a community. I mean, so like my friend Greta Vosper, I don't know if you know
Yeah, I've
Greta.
heard her name.
Yeah, you should definitely ask her to come on sometime. She is a pastor, a minister of a congregation in the Toronto, sort of the outlying area of Toronto in Canada. And they sort of originated and still are part of the United Church of Canada, but they are expressly non-theistic.
Oh,
So
yeah.
there are people in the congregation who are theistic, and there are lots of people that aren't, and they don't sing songs that refer to theism or Jesus. They don't say the creed. They don't read the Bible. I don't know if they refer to the Bible narratively or not. I imagine from time to time that happens, but they're focused on being a community for their community. And so I think that's definitely, we have our faith community here in Pasadena is very involved in the tenants' rights struggle and other struggles for social and economic justice. And I think you just have to not care what the rest of the Christian community thinks. Like, you just have to somehow be your thing. And see, the problem with me was that I was tied to a denomination that cared very much about that, and also paid my salary and so forth. And so they had control over me in a way that you wouldn't if you started something or were a part of something that didn't have those connections. And you have to be comfortable, alienating people. Like, some people are going to just say, you people are of the devil, and I can't be a part of you. And you have to be able to look at them and say, okay, like, that's cool.
Yeah. So did you ever see yourself in one of those congregations, or was it just too much? Well, was it just better to just make a...
I actually wanted to start when the moment that I thought I'll start my own congregation, in the aftermath of leaving the Adventist church. I thought, I want to start a congregation that creed is not a factor, that it would be a political commitment, that it would be, a political commitment. And again, when I say political, I don't mean like Republicans and Democrats and libertarians and elections and all of that. I'm talking about like social politic, like the idea that we are invested in our in the question of power and who has it and who doesn't and why and all of that. So I thought, well, okay, the basic sort of, I guess, grounding for this congregation would be your commitment to those things, to equality and justice. And then you could have certain creedal, or I mean, that's probably putting it too strongly, but like beliefs that accrete around those, or like that you then certain members of the congregation would believe certain things about the supernatural, but it would be secondary to those other commitments that we share in common.
That's key.
So we share, like, for example, we share in common, I'm just making this up right now, like a commitment to welcome the stranger and to be welcoming of immigrants. So we don't recognize national boundaries. Like, we don't recognize national borders as indicative of anything. And other than human struggle to control one another. So we reject that. We reject, national boundaries, and that's like a platform, and then if you also believe that Jesus held up those values and therefore you like Jesus because he had those values, then that's great.
Yeah.
Like, you can be here too, but not everyone who has that value about a borderless, world necessarily has to also think Jesus was cool. But if you think Jesus was cool for that reason, then that's great, cool. But I would, like, as you say, it was just too much at the time to be, it wasn't so much theologically too much. It was just emotionally, like, to start a congregation, to try to, like, whip up that energy and try to pull people together. I was just beat. I was just so tired.
I have a lot of respect for, well, I have to be careful when I say that, but I have a lot of respect for pastors of small congregations that are just really trying to do the best they can for their community. I mean, they're not on TV, they're not flashy. They're just, I think people like you in your shoes, and so many of them are struggling with depression. They're struggling with doubt. And I know places like the Clergy Project, Jerry DeWitt was a part of that. I don't know if he still is, but do you have any suggestions for pastors that are struggling?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the status of the clergy project, but certainly in principle, it is and was a great thing for folks to connect anonymously and safely with one another if they had doubts. I mean, I think that the clergy are probably some of the most lonely people on the planet. In particular, I think because of the pressure that's on them to maintain belief in the face of doubt. Like
Mm-hmm.
they never have. I mean, I think if you go to the average congregation, right, and then after Sunday service, people go to a restaurant, say, and they start talking to one another. It would be totally acceptable for one of those members to say to another, I don't know, man, like, do you ever
Yeah.
wonder, like, if God really exists,
Yeah.
And then the other one's like, oh yeah, I definitely have wondered that, but come on, like,
Yeah.
you know he does, right? And then they have that conversation and they're like, oh, cool, like, nice hanging out with you. And they both go home and that's a
Mm-hmm.
great conversation that they had. But if the pastor's there
Yeah. Forget it.
at that table,
Yeah.
they're
Dude,
not going to have that conversation. And even if they do have that conversation, the pastor could never admit to having those feelings.
mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, the sort of the pressure that's on clergy. But I also think that they are often the most aware of the contradictions of their faith.
Mm-hmm. Oh
And
yeah.
so I think if you find other clergy in your community, especially more progressive ones. So if you're an evangelical, seek out that Episcopalian priest that you were told was probably not even Christian,
Yeah.
and go talk to them and find out what they think, and make friends with other clergy in a way that you can safely unburden yourself in that context, and realize, I think, that there are multiple ways of being Christian clergy. Like, you don't have
Yeah.
to be evangelical in your approach. And also, I think people feel trapped by their paycheck, these golden handcuffs that keep you stuck in a place. And so I would, if I had to do it over again, do better at finding a plan B or a sort of a smoother transition than just being unemployed.
Mm.
And a lot of people do have that, a lot of people have a vocation that they could go back to, or they could, I don't know, go to night school and come up with some other plan, and then, make that transition out if they felt like they had to.
My friend David Hayward, the Naked Pastor, he's
Yeah.
he offers a lot of resources to help people kind of transition through that. And the other day he posted that, like, people think when he left his church or faith or whatever that he was giving up, and in fact it wasn't a giving up. It's actually taken much more energy where he is now to survive and to find a community, to find a community and a thought, and to make it. But
yeah, it's tough.
So I think my last question for you today is: does spirituality have a place in your atheism? Like mindful meditation, studying consciousness, all these things, or is that just not how you operate?
I mean, I think it depends on what you mean by spirituality,
Sure,
but I'll
sure.
just take a stab at it. Like, I don't have a specific spiritual practice.
Mm-hmm.
There's a part of me that wishes I did, and then there's a part of me that just knows that that's not how I'm wired.
Yeah.
But I feel very spiritual in some sense, like the way that I feel moved by a beautiful poem or an amazing novel or a movie that just captures the human condition,
Mm-hmm.
or nature, or, beautiful photography, or, anything that's in the arts
Yeah.
and the natural world. Like, I definitely feel moved by those things, right? That it makes me aware of my, like my awareness, and it
Yeah.
makes me aware of myself and my place in the universe, whatever that is. And
Yeah.
I'm very interested in the question around meaning. If I would have one recommendation for you and your listeners, it would be this book that came out last year by this Yale philosopher named Martin Hageland. And the book is called This Life. And you use the expression, and everyone does, you used the expression earlier, like to say like to be focused on this life, like that's what it means to be a humanist or an atheist. And the subtitle of the book is Secular Faith and Spiritual Freedom. And it's very much like a social, political, I guess, articulation of what it means to be mortal, what it means to be human. And I think that question of what it means to be human and how to like embrace that and live ethically as a human being, to me, that's all very spiritual.
Yes. And that's where I get so confused, Ryan, because that's where I see the person of Jesus. It's Jesus the Christ that we transform to make him who we want him to be. But right. Jesus of the Sermon on the Mount is this life, is the rich to be, or the poor to be rich, the weak to be strong. And I just don't understand where it's lost in translation. I get so confused.
Yeah. What was I seeing just the other day? Someone was again making this point that Jesus didn't talk about going to heaven. There was like a Christian theologian who was making the point that Jesus didn't really, like in the Bible, there's no like talk of like, believe in me so you can go to heaven. I mean, there is that, John 3:16 talks about eternal life. And I think eternal life is a really problematic concept. And so Jesus isn't without his problems. I mean, I think this is what took me some time to come to, that Jesus also has some pretty unfortunate things to say along the way. And but once you're not tied to having to think Jesus was perfect, then you can accept that too, maybe. Like to say, like, I mean, Jesus was a product of his time and place. So he had his problems too. But as a Christian, you can't say that. You can't, as a conservative Christian, you can't be like, oh, Jesus had his problems. Like, no. Jesus was perfect.
Especially as a pastor.
Yeah, exactly. So I think if you can humanize Jesus and you can say like, if he existed as we think he did, I mean, I tend to think he was, that there was a historical Jesus. I know that's controversial in some areas, but I think there was a historical Jesus. I don't think he really was much like what we have in the Bible. I think that's a composite of maybe multiple different people and also people's wish fulfillment and all of that. But even if you just take the Jesus of the narrative, there are problems there, but also a lot to be learned by it. And he certainly challenged power, challenged religious institutions, political institutions in ways that have motivated lots and lots of people to stand up for themselves and take back their power. But there are also passages where he talks about surrendering that power. So it's like,
I hear you. It's however it's taught to you, it can be spun. Yeah. Yep. I heard a quote, or I read a quote from Sam Harris this week that I thought was beautiful. It's probably a good place to end on. It said, atheism does not close the door to unconditional love, self-transcendence, or any other spiritual experience. It just closes the door to the infantile certainty that a specific book was written by the creator of the universe.
Yeah, it's well said.
So thank you for your service to your community and to the tenants' rights and everything you're doing. I think it's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's great to get to know you a little bit better and meet some of your virtually here, some of your community. And
I want to introduce all my friends to you.
I hope there's some conversation about what we talked about here. That'd be fun to see.
Sweet. Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, thanks so much.